Good day, friends. Thank you so much for watching The Gathering Place, where we offer hope for those who want hope and those who want to learn about spiritual, emotional, and mental well-being. It's a very important time for us because we care about you, and we're glad you watch. We're glad that you're part of this week after week. We have many viewers, and we have some consistently that watch our program, and we're so glad that you do. We are going to pick up today from our discussion last week on a family theology, a subject that we probably had never thought of in those terms before, but by default had assumed everybody had one, or most people had one, but is not the case. About a quarter of the population of male and female adults do not or do attend church. It's like 75% of the adults do not attend church. And that's bothersome to some people. I was pastor for 37 years to me, and I care about people. And I think church is very, very important. And I think pastors and teachers and church workers give an awful lot of their time and themselves for the sake of helping others. And church is a place of help. But it's a very important topic for other reasons as well. Here with Ben and Talora Bookie, as usual. Ben and Talora, talk to us a little bit more about why it's so important.
So, I had our men's breakfast this weekend, and this is the very topic that came up. And I didn't bring it up. I was, and I don't think the people that brought it up, or even anybody necessarily that was there, had watched our broadcast last week. At least nobody said they did. I didn't ask because my feelings would have gotten hurt if they'd said no. What are you talking about? But but they brought this up, and we had grandfathers and fathers and some teenage boys there, and just talking about this, and they're and almost flabbergasted that people wouldn't talk about what they believe with their children. But that's a really common thing in our culture, that, oh, well, I don't want to push religion on my children, they can decide when they're older. But our children aren't going to necessarily decide, oh, I'm going to follow Christ. They're going to probably just do nothing, maybe be apathetic. But even going to like the extremes of like, oh, I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic, and so it's really important that we teach this to our children. Biblically, it even tells us to do that. And but we know, of course, looking at it even from the mental health perspective, research is very clear that church attendance is a protective factor against so many things. It decreases the risk of completing a suicide. It makes our chances of getting into deep depressions or anxiety lower, not zero, because we know that even as with believers, we will struggle with those things because the Bible tells us that we will, but but it is a protective factor. It is helpful for us. And and there's even some research out of Baylor University, when they look at people who actually believe in a theological biblical God, that even more so there's even greater mental health benefits to that, which we shouldn't be surprised about. But so we know this is important, and we shouldn't be afraid of that topic in our families. And and so I think about my dad. um, he wasn't there. Like, we didn't do family devotions. We talked about this a little bit last week. We didn't do family devotions. And apparently he is watching this, so I have to make sure I don't say anything about him that might get me in trouble. But like, I can remember we'd sit and we'd be watching TV, and my dad is the type of person, if he's watching TV and you start talking, he's gonna pause his show and he's gonna look at you.
I know somebody else who does
I
it.
do that too now, but when I was a kid,
He just feels
see, yeah, but when I was a kid, he had this running commentary going during TV shows. Anytime something came up that was even that he perceived as being anti-God or anti-biblical, like so like, and he would just present the truth, like, and uh, and it could be any topic. It didn't matter what it was. It could be the language they were using on the show. It could be people having sex outside of marriage. It didn't matter. Like he just had just kind of like nothing, big. He didn't make a big deal about it. He would just like comment on it. And I didn't realize, of course, that, oh, I was learning some theology there, our family theology, because he wanted to make sure that we all knew about that.
Right. Yeah, for us, it was the 5 o'clock dinner time. We decided that our kids, unless it was something we all agreed upon, would be home at 5 o'clock and sit around the table, and we could talk about anything, any subject whatsoever. And we treated every subject, or at least attempted to, in the same way. We took it seriously. We made jokes about it, which is taking it seriously, because sometimes subjects are heavy and you have to lighten it a little bit, or you can't really get into it. And
Mhm.
so we talked about a lot of things. Uh, Being a pastor for 37 years, I feel remarkably blessed. I can't think of one time that I've had a problem in the raising of our girls ever. I mean, they never stayed out significantly past curfew, maybe maybe a couple of minutes. It's never gave us any trouble. They were good girls, still are good girls, serving the Lord. So, my view might be a little bit slanted. I was raised in a Christian household to be a Christian. There's just no two ways about it. I fell in love with church at a very young age. I wanted to be like my pastors. I so wanted to be one of those guys. And my dad, my grandfather, my great uncle Marsh, who passed away at 103 a few years ago, standing there with arms raised, worshiping the Lord, tears rolling down their face, is imprinted in my mind and in my soul as what it looks like to have a living relationship with the living God.
yeah.
And to me, that is just something that if you're around, you catch it. You know,
Yeah.
you just it gets on you. I remember standing and staring at them thinking, I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to understand that better. Oddly, some of my friends thought it was stupid and dumb, and they were, when it came time for reading scripture, they always had a sore throat, in Sunday school class, but they're all in church now because their parents found a way to keep the conversation alive. But there's another
Mhm.
factor, and that is the people of church. When you're around good people that serve as signposts, I suppose, and you see them week after week being themselves in church, that you can trust these people. They're good people
Yeah.
for the most part. There are always exceptions, but it's a social group. I mean, it's a lot of things, but these are your people. They'll pray for you. They'll call you when you're sick. They'll take food to your home when you've had a surgery. When your child is going through a hard time, they're going to start a prayer chain for you to comfort you and to help you.
Mhm.
That's, I mean, where do you get that? You're just not going to get that anywhere else. So I think it's worth it to give all that we can to the subject matter. Taylor, when is it too much?
Um, what do you mean? Like,
When,
when's what?
what kinds of settings, what kinds of situations might cause a child to say, back off. What's going on here? I mean, I don't want to do that. I mean, there
I
could be
think
a
when,
lot of different settings, but
right. And I think when there's a little bit of a discrepancy, I don't want to just say a little bit, but when they feel that you are not being the same person you are at church as the person in the home.
that's right.
Does that make sense? Yeah. And kids notice that and they don't want any part of it. They're like, well, you're a hypocrite.
Right.
And so I think that is a big piece. Also, when it comes to, and I'm going to throw this word out, legalism. And we all know what that is. I can define it if you want to, but I won't. But when it becomes very legalistic in the home too, I think that's
A
another
lot of
issue.
rules you're talking about, a lot of
Yeah.
related
So
to
yeah.
God, rules.
Yep. Saying you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this. And I think it becomes that, how am I going to measure up? I can't do all those things. How am I going to measure up? I can't, you know, I can't even think of one of like a scenario. But well, when I was growing up, and some people may believe in dresses. I'm not trying to knock that or anything, but that was a big thing in our family. When I was young, up until the age of 7, I only wore dresses or culottes. We had TVs, but we weren't allowed to go to the movies. We couldn't wear shorts. Um, I know that there was a big issue with like Pepsi drinking or something. It was either Pepsi or Coke. My grandma stopped drinking it because I think it was Pepsi, because it was linked to something demonic. I can't remember the exact reason, but those are the things that kids see and they can't measure up. They can't, you know, I don't mind wearing dresses now, but I don't want to wear them all the time.
Right. Well, one of
No,
the blessings of being 50 is you don't have to wear what you don't want to wear. I mean, that's
I know,
yeah,
I know.
you
I'm
know,
like,
Who's 50?
I am.
he's super young. He's super
Wow.
young.
All right. So what are some other factors? So that definitely legalism right
Yeah.
up there, hypocrisy right up there. There are, and I think we just have to admit it, there are toxic churches.
Yes.
What do I mean by toxic churches? Churches where the biosphere, the whole atmosphere, the DNA of that church is built around a personality, almost
Yep.
cult-like. It's a power thing. The preacher is sometimes angry and also sometimes mixed in with politics, and you don't have a choice, man. I mean, you're there and it's expected that you're going to bend under that pressure. Those are toxic churches, and if you're in one of those, I encourage you to say, "Help!"
Yep.
Send a note, and we'll find you a good church. And kids in those churches oftentimes come away with very unrealistic expectations, or cave to certain deviancies that
Mm-hmm.
manifest in their lives because they have to appear this way at church, or they're going to get knocked upside the head.
Yep.
And then there's some other part of their life that wants to go a different way, and so they find a way for that to happen.
Well, one of the things I thought was interesting, and this is kind of shifting a little bit from the family, but 37% of pastors, this was a number I heard, suffer from narcissistic personality disorder or some type of personality disorder.
Yeah, I read that too recently.
I thought that was
Actually,
an
it's part
interesting
of
number.
there was a study by the FBI, and I heard this on
Mm-hmm.
the news, and I looked it up, and yeah, it's a study of careers that narcissists are drawn to: CEOs,
Mhm.
surgeons,
Yep.
ministers, pastors. You wield a lot of power or authority. You really do.
Yep.
Yep.
And some churches more than others. There are
Mhm.
certain congregational churches where that isn't the case, because church is governed a little differently. You have certain churches where a priest or a rector or a bishop or pastor, they lay down the law, and it's all about them. It's all about their way of thinking and what they believe is right. And
And there's consequences if you don't follow what they say, right?
Yep.
I,
Which could be like you lose your family, you lose your friends,
Yep.
you know. So
I have a friend who's a counselor in another state who asked me to help him with music to a song, to a poem he'd written because his daughter, a Christian counselor, his daughter had accepted a position at a church in yet a different state. And she and her husband went there, and the pastor made it a point to let her know that he was going to be her bishop and their family's bishop, and whatever they needed, they should call him because he was there for that. And it was great. And unfortunately, she had an affair. It was a brief affair, but it was an affair. And man, did it turn out to be horrible. They made her stand in front of this church of thousands and confess what she had done. She was shunned by her church. This is a Pentecostal church in another state within the last 10 years. I mean, this is not something that happened 100 years ago. She wanted to go to a counselor. It was in her hiring agreement that the counselor that she chose had to be the counselor of the church, and that by signing this, she didn't realize what she was doing. She signed away her rights that the counselor would tell the pastor everything that she talked about.
Oh, wow.
So it was a cyclical, narcissistic
Yeah.
philosophy, and it was about all that she could do to keep her head above water. She lost everything. She lost her family. The pastor and the husband got together and told her that they had decided what was going to happen in her life.
Wow.
So let's face it, there are enough of those stories around that if you are remotely connected to a situation like that, you're going to run. And I don't blame you.
Yeah.
I just
No.
don't blame you at all, because
No.
it's not about, your running is not about God. You know,
Right.
you're not running away from God. You're running away from some abusive situation. And I know you guys have similar stories
Yeah.
of counseling.
Yep. Well, and I think too, like if you look at it, that the toxicity as poison, and once it enters in, it consumes your heart, it consumes your brain, and that's all you could think about, trying to either measure up or trying to get away because, why are they treating me like this? There's so many questions that go through a person's mind and causes them to have a lot of doubts and doubts about where's God, where's God in all this?
And I think that's one of the things, I mean, piggybacking on that about why it's so important to have our family theology, because, and not being and having a safe place to ask questions. I didn't know that I couldn't ask questions, right? I could ask my parents anything I wanted. I could, my grandma, I talked about her last time, I had people I could ask. And, I wasn't afraid to go to my Sunday school teacher and ask questions, or, the pastor, the church we started going to when I was 12, like, we could ask him anything. And if he didn't know, he'd tell you he didn't know. He wouldn't make it up, which we've seen some pastors do, right? Which creates this issue with people trying to stay in church. But but he actually had a long time. He did this series of, ask the pastor, and he had a question box that people would, and he would get them out, and he would, if he didn't know, he would do his best to find out what the Bible really said about that question. And
That's great.
it gets back to like that First Peter 3:15, it talks about, it's talking about suffering, which is kind of what I really was getting to here, is like, in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect, which is a piece we often forget when we're trying to talk about these things. But this verse in context is talking about suffering, and that's one of the big questions that people really struggle with. And does your family have a theology about suffering and what that means, and not shying away from that, because we have this culture that says, well, if you do everything right, then God's going to bless you and your life's going to be great, and that is not what the Bible says at all. but we somehow have learned that. And which I'll give a little plug in a book. Right, I'm reading. I haven't finished this, so I can't 100% recommend it because I haven't finished it, but so far so good. It's called The Night is Normal, and it's, I don't know how you say her last name, but it's Chole, Coley. So Alicia Britt Coley, I don't know, Cole maybe, but she talks about this thing that we need, the night for our spiritual growth. And we've kind of lost that in our culture. I think historically it's been there,
When
but
you say the night,
we've
what are you referring to exactly?
those times of testing of our faith, of suffering, of doubt, uncertainty, right? And our when you read like the writings of the uh, all the way back centuries, right? Like they weren't afraid to talk about doubt,
Right.
but we are for some reason, as if that's somehow, oh, we're not Christians, we're not good enough if we have any doubts,
Well, it
and
doesn't
that's
suit
partly
our
for family.
American flavor of evangelicalism.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because Second Corinthians 1, 3-7, Paul talks about he says, I have went through sufferings and God has given me peace so that when you're going through sufferings, I can show you also this peace that God gave me.
Right.
So why
Right.
is he always talking about sufferings if there's not going to be things that happen in our lives? But he's saying, hey, things are going to happen. This is what the church is there for, to support each other, to show how God helped us through it. That's what we teach our kids. That's those things that we, like my mom was, I mean, she would just pray, and like if anything was happening in our lives, she was praying and she would tell us, I've been praying for you. So that right there, having the theology and putting it in your children, that prayer is important, that communication with God's important, having people surround you and support you is important.
Yeah. There's no replacement for love, pure,
Mm.
unfiltered love that
Yeah.
has no motive other than to love, that
Yeah.
isn't coercive, it's not manipulative, it's not to cause a reaction in you. You're just going to be loved no matter what you do or how you do it. We love you. And sometimes Christians get that right.
Yeah.
And when they do, it's usually because they were exposed to somebody who had that love. And
I want to read. Oh, sorry.
no, go
I
ahead.
just want to share with you Deuteronomy 11. It's chapter 11, verses 18, 19. Hopefully I can read it. Starting to get that. And I'm 50, as someone pointed out earlier. And so my eyes are kind of dim a little bit. So we'll try to read it. So it says, so commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these words of mine. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Teach them to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you're on the road, when you are going to bed and when you are getting up. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates.
Right.
Right there. That's right. The whole theology is to
Yeah.
share that with
Well, that
kids. You're
was
not.
such a central part of Judaism,
Yeah.
so important to people. And when we talk about faith, of course, we come from a Christian point of view, and
Yeah.
faith was in part derived from Judaism. But Judaism provided for us a sense of wholehearted love for God.
Mhm.
Jesus reiterated that the greatest commandment, found also in the Jewish law, said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Um, there's a term going around called deconstruction. Uh, you've probably heard about it. I don't want to take a lot of time on it, but it's really sometimes a misapplied term. I think originally it came up in the 60s. It was a French philosophical movement called deconstructionism, and it had to do with literary deconstruction, language, understanding the original meaning of terms. And the idea posited at that point was, why do we, and it was, of course, from a very secular perspective, why do we have to say that what that guy said 150 or 500 or 600 years ago, when transliterated from French philosophical literature, is representative of the truth? And that now that is the truth, and I have to go, don't we move forward in some way? Does it mean the same thing? And of course, you have that today. We're always adding words on a regular basis to our lexicon, to our dictionary, to our sense of vernacular, what the things we say day in and day out. Well, somehow, because that was an attractive way of thinking for a lot of people, it has found its way into religion. And I'm not saying it shouldn't, but it's there. And especially in evangelicalism. It's a huge thing in evangelicalism. Maybe a lot of reasons for it. I don't want to venture why they are. Maybe some we've already touched on tonight. But a lot of young adults and middle-aged evangelicals are looking at their faith and they're saying, okay, all right, what's right about this and what isn't? And really, deconstruction is not something that has to be a bad thing. You know, you look at it, and maybe there are some things that we picked up along the way that aren't so good that we need to remove from our lives. However, there always seem to be antagonists in this life, no matter what the subject matter is. And you'll find them in books and on the radio and in podcasts, encouraging you to leave the religion of your youth and to get away from it because you can decide on your own what you want to. Well, of course you can, but that doesn't mean that the loving truths that you were taught need to be replaced. So I just wanted to mention that as a real factor, perhaps as a bit of consolation to parents or pastors who see that happening on their turf or on their watch, to know that you're not alone, and to realize that a lot of young people and young adults are really struggling for their faith right now. And if it's a healthy home, if it's a healthy church, you'll be there to love them and to let them ask you questions and even get in your face sometimes and tell you why they don't believe in your stupid religion. And it's at that point when they open that wound that you just need to let love ooze out. Because if you do, they won't wander far.
Yep. Yeah. And I do think that's the key, though, isn't it? That, of course, says first commandment, right? Love the Lord your God. Second commandment, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. And I think we forget our neighbor includes our kids and grandkids. It includes our family. And we have to love them just like we're to love Christ. And how do we love Christ? Well, we love Christ as he loves us. And if we would just do that, right, just start there, right, our family theology is gonna flow from that. And so and that's kind of like, I guess the thing is like, because people are probably watching. I don't know. How do I start a family theology? Love.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Love like Christ.
Yeah.
So
there are so many extremes to all faiths. In Christianity, you can read books and hear stories about, if you pray these prayers and say it this way, then everything you ask for will come to pass. And some people struggle with that their whole lives. And sometimes they do come to pass. And sometimes they don't come to pass. And a healthy, well-rounded philosophy or theology will help you understand that you don't have to throw it all away when it doesn't turn out the way you wanted it to turn out. That there's something else at work in your faith with God that's more important than the thing you need right now. And hard to accept, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
Well, we hope that
Um,
this has been a helpful time for you. And we're just going to wrap up with whatever comments are left on our mind and leave you with our best wishes. Ben and Talora, anything else you would like to add?
Well, one of the things throughout this conversation that I was thinking of was I believe it was last year when we began to have all these little pockets of revival on universities.
Mm.
Remember that? And the kids would just sit there for days, just worshiping and praying with each other. Um, and I was so moved by that because that told me that this upcoming generation has a heart for God and they do want to see change. Um, so going back to the theology piece is that, you know, what parents are doing as a Christian, in a Christian home, there has to be some type of, I don't know, sticking. I don't know the word. It's getting dark. I can't remember words.
Yeah, there you go. The lights are going.
I know. I'm like,
That
I
was a
don't know.
great, those are great times. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it was. The revival is awesome.
Yeah.
So,
Ben, anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think I just end with, another scripture that is similar to the one I shared before, but this time from Corinthians 4, um, verse 6. This is Paul wrapping up his letter, or Colossians. Did I say Corinthians? Colossians 4, 6. Paul's just wrapping up his letter and just giving them some things. He's been talking about how to interact with people, fathers, and this is where just before this he said, fathers, don't provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. And he talked about husbands and wives, but just kind of he's just wrapping this up. And one of the things he says is, let your speech always be gracious, right? That grace that people need, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. And if we can just slow this down and just give that grace to people when they have the hard questions, when they're doubting, when they're combative, right? And just meet them with graciousness, just slowing it down, so that we know, um, in the spirit how to answer what it is that they need in that moment, and allowing for that to be.
and one of the things I always encourage too, if I have like uh, patients or clients or whatever word you want to use come to me and say, my pastor said this. Did you ask him what it meant? Ask him what it means. You know, if we're not asking questions, how are we supposed to be able to give a clear answer to our children or answer, to our family about, okay, this is what we understand and know about God.
Sometimes people in authority, including pastors, abuse their authority because they're just bullies. But
Yep.
sometimes they do that because we allow that to happen. We don't
Mhm.
ask those questions. We don't hold them accountable. And the odds are,
Mhm.
if you're not holding them accountable, nobody else is holding them accountable. And those are just parameters for healthy relationships.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you have to be disrespectful
Yeah.
or get into an argument. It just means, why did you say that? What did that mean? How does that? Well, this is what that felt like to me. This is what that was. And you'll tell in just a few minutes whether that was motivated by love or there was something else behind it. And you can learn a lot about it. And sometimes people don't like to be questioned, but most pastors, most leaders, if they've spent any time with people, really appreciate being asked because it means you care, you want to know, and a relationship will come out of those questions. And that's why we do what we do. Well, we're out of time. So we thank you so much for watching us tonight at our time, which is Saturday evening, not because we're Jewish or Seventh day Adventist, but because that We pre-recorded because of other commitments, so you'll get it on Sunday night. God bless you. Just know that we're praying for you. And please let us know if there's anything we can pray about in particular. Share your email one more time, if you would, Ben or Talora.
Or you mean our webpage is
Yes.
QuiesCounseling.com. So QUIES counseling.com.
And they'll be able to find the email link there.
Yep. The email, phone number, they can text the phone, they can find us on Facebook, they can message us on Facebook. However, yeah.
And you
There's
can
links
find
all
me
that right
at kenshelton.info. That's simple. And you can go to all my pages from there. God bless you once again. Thanks. We'll see you next week. Have a great 4th of July. Bye-bye now.